Nobody wanted the shift outside observation room for. That was the truth Maria Alvarez learned the hard way when the schedule went up that morning and her name sat beside the one assignment everyone else had begged to avoid. Rex, the German Shepherd, had arrived 2 nights earlier from a decommissioned military unit, and in that time he had already put one orderly in the emergency room with a torn sleeve and a deep bruise on his forearm. The base's veterinary staff called him unmanageable. The security detail called him a liability. The colonel who signed off on his transfer to the medical wing for evaluation called him, quietly, a soldier who had never been given the chance to stop fighting a war. Maria had been a trauma nurse for 11 years, 6 of them spent stateside after 2 deployments overseas. She had seen men come back from combat zones with injuries that no scan could ever properly measure, wounds buried so deep in the nervous system that a raised voice or a slammed door could trigger a response no one could reason with. She recognized something in the intake reports about Rex that the veterinary team, for all their expertise, seemed to be missing entirely. They kept describing him in terms of aggression and threat assessment. Maria kept circling back to a single word in his file: hypervigilant. That word did not belong to a dangerous animal. It belonged to a survivor. Winder. Bennett found her outside the observation room that afternoon. He did not bother disguising his concern. He was the kind of physician who had built his reputation on caution, on protocols followed to the letter, and the plan forming in Maria's head violated nearly every one of them. She wanted 5 unsupervised minutes alone with Rex. No leash restraint team stationed at the door, no sedatives on standby, nothing but herself and a dog that had already drawn blood once this week. Dr. Bennett told her flatly that it was not going to happen, that the risk to her safety was not something he was willing to authorize, that there were other ways to evaluate a service animal's fitness for duty, without putting a nurse in a locked room with him. But Maria had not built her career on caution. She had built it on reading people, and animals, in the moments when their pain overruled their training. She reminded Dr. Bennett, gently but firmly, that Rex had served 2 tours alongside a handler who had died in the field 8 months earlier, a detail buried on page 6 of his intake file that nobody upstairs seemed to have actually read. Every attempt to introduce a new handler since then had ended the same way. Rex lunging, snapping, driving every well-meaning stranger back through the door before they could so much as clip a leash to his harness. The dog was not dangerous. The dog was grieving, and every unfamiliar face that walked into his space was one more person who was not the man he had lost. Word travels fast in a hospital, and by the time Maria stood at the door of observation room 4 with her badge already swiped, a small crowd had gathered on the other side of the observation glass. Nurses, techs, 2 uniformed officers from base security, even a cluster of military personnel who had heard the story secondhand and could not quite believe a decision like this had been approved. Dr. Bennett stood at the front of them, arms crossed, unable to stop what was now already in motion, his jaw tight with the particular frustration of a man who has argued his case and lost. Through the glass, Rex's ears were already pinned back. His posture was low, tense, coiled like a spring that had been wound too many times without release. The moment the door handle turned, a chorus of gasps rippled through the gathered crowd, hands flying to mouths, someone whispering that this was a mistake, that someone should stop her before it was too late. Maria stepped inside and let the door click shut behind her. The room went from murmuring to silent in an instant. Every person pressed against that glass held their breath as Rex's head snapped toward her, a deep growl rolling up from his chest, teeth bared, every muscle in his body screaming a warning that would have sent most people scrambling for the exit. Maria did not reach for him. She did not raise her hands or make a sound. She simply lowered herself to one knee, slow and deliberate, the way she had learned to move around men fresh off medevac flights who could not yet distinguish a nurse's approach from a threat. She kept her eyes down, her shoulders soft, her breathing steady and visible so that the dog could see plainly that nothing about her was a danger to him. Outside the glass, Dr. Bennett's hand had drifted to the radio at his hip, ready to call for the restraint team the instant things went wrong. The soldiers in the crowd, men who had handled dogs like Rex themselves, watched with the particular tension of people who understood exactly what a bared set of teeth from an animal that size actually meant. A few seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Rex's growl did not stop. If anything, it deepened, and he took one stiff, deliberate step forward across the tile floor. Close enough now that anyone watching could see the exact moment his jaw tightened around a decision that could not be undone. And that was the moment the door behind the crowd burst open, and someone new stepped into the hallway. Someone whose presence changed everything Maria thought she understood about why this dog had been so impossible to reach. If a story like this keeps you on the edge of your seat, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss what happens when courage meets compassion in the moments that matter most. Chapter 2 continues everything you have been waiting for. The man who stepped through the hallway door was not hospital staff. He wore a faded army jacket a size too large for his thin frame. And the moment his boots hit the tile, the entire crowd at the observation window turned toward him instead of the glass. Dr. Bennett recognized him before anyone said a word, and the color drained slightly from his face. This was Specialist Daniel Cho, the soldier who had been paired with Rex during his second tour. The handler whose name appeared throughout the dog's file in a dozen commendations for search and recovery work, and the man everyone had assumed, based on outdated paperwork, had been killed in the same incident that took Rex's original handler. The truth, as it turned out, was far more complicated. Daniel had not died. He had been medically discharged after a traumatic brain injury from the same explosion that killed his fellow handler, spending the better part of a year in and out of rehabilitation facilities, unreachable by the chain of command that had since lost track of exactly where Rex had ended up. He had spent months trying to locate his dog through channels that kept dead-ending in bureaucratic silence, until a nurse he had never met posted a single photo on a base family support forum 2 days earlier. A photo of a scared, snarling German shepherd nobody could handle, captioned only with a request for information about his service history. Daniel had seen that photo at 2 in the morning and driven 6 hours through the night without sleeping. Inside the observation room, Rex's growling had not stopped, but something in his posture had begun to shift the instant Daniel's voice carried faintly through the door. A low, familiar call of the dog's name that cut through the tension like nothing Maria had managed in the 5 long minutes before it. She did not move. She stayed exactly where she was, kneeling, steady, unthreatening, because she understood in that instant that this moment did not belong to her anymore. Dr. Bennett, against every protocol instinct in his body, made the call that would define the next 30 seconds of everyone's life. He opened the door and let Daniel step through. What happened next was not the dramatic, cinematic reunion anyone watching might have expected. Rex did not immediately bound across the room. He froze entirely, ears twitching, nose lifting into the air as if verifying a signal his body did not yet trust. 11 months of grief and confusion compressed into a single suspended heartbeat. Then, all at once, the growl broke apart into something closer to a whimper, and the dog that had terrorized an entire hospital wing crossed the room in 3 strides and pressed his full weight against Daniel's legs, shaking, his tail beating frantically against the tile, sounds coming from him that had nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with relief so overwhelming it had nowhere else to go. The crowd at the window did not cheer immediately. They simply stood there, hands still pressed to their mouths, some of them crying without quite realizing it, watching a dog they had all been trained to fear collapse into the arms of the one person who had ever truly belonged to him. Maria rose slowly from the floor and stepped back, letting the 2 of them have the room, watching Daniel sink to his knees and bury his face in the fur at Rex's neck, murmuring words too quiet for anyone outside to hear. Dr. Bennett, still standing in the doorway, finally let go of the radio at his hip. In the weeks that followed, the story of what happened in Observation Room 4 traveled well beyond the base. Told and retold by everyone who had stood at that glass and watched a nurse's quiet instinct succeed where an entire team of specialists had failed. Maria never framed it as bravery. She insisted every time someone asked that she had simply recognized a pattern she had spent a career learning to read. That fear dressed as aggression is so often just grief with nowhere left to go, whether it belongs to a soldier, a patient, or the animal that loved him most. Rex was formally reassigned to Daniel's care within the month, the reunion becoming the centerpiece of a program the hospital later built to reconnect discharged handlers with the service animals they had been separated from during recovery, a program that has since brought a dozen more pairs like them back together. Dr. Bennett kept a photograph on his desk from that day, not of the dramatic standoff through the glass, but of the quiet moment after. Maria standing at the edge of the room with her arms crossed, watching a man and his dog find their way back to each other after a year neither of them should have had to survive alone. He told colleagues afterward that it was the closest thing he had ever seen to proof that medicine is not only about protocols and risk assessments, but about the willingness, every once in a while, to trust the instinct of someone who has learned to see past the surface of a threat and into the wound underneath it. Rex never showed aggression toward hospital staff again. He did, however, develop a particular fondness for the nurse who once knelt in front of him without fear, greeting her every visit afterward with a wagging tail and a gentleness that no one, not even Maria herself, had been entirely certain he still had in him. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this one, stories about courage, loyalty, and the bonds that survive against every odd, are exactly what this channel is built to bring you every single week.